The last 7 words of Jesus before dying. A crowd had gathered. Some were crying, others were mocking. "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." The Pharisees shouted in scorn. The soldiers laughed at him. Their words echoed, but Jesus stayed silent. Darkness covered the sky. Jesus' hands were nailed to the cross, his body torn, and drops of blood fell to the ground. In this pain and suffering, Jesus spoke 7 words that would change history forever. These 7 words are often considered the greatest speech ever made. Let's look at the first one. The first word, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." No one expected Jesus to say these words. Instead of cursing those who were hurting him, he chose to forgive them. He could have condemned everyone there with just one word, but he didn't. Jesus showed us the heart of his mission, forgiveness. Instead of reacting with hate, he prayed for those who were hurting him. Have you ever been in a situation where forgiving someone seemed impossible? What stopped you from doing it? Jesus' attitude challenges us all. When someone wrongs us, our natural instinct is to want revenge or hold a grudge. But Jesus shows us another way. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack full of stones, each one representing an offense or hurt from the past. Every step you take becomes harder because of the weight. Now imagine dropping that backpack and feeling lighter and freer. That's what forgiveness does. It releases us from the burden of the past and helps us move forward with peace and freedom. Matthew says, "Do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." Those who don't forgive end up hurting themselves, both physically and spiritually. Forgiveness is the healing of the soul. It cleanses our minds and hearts. People who hold on to bitterness become like prisoners of their own anger. Forgiveness is the only way to turn our inner pain into peace and holiness. The second word, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Jesus hung between 2 thieves. They were not just petty criminals. These were men who had stolen and killed. They were despised by everyone. Jesus, on the other hand, was crucified for a crime he didn't commit. Mocking and insults surrounded him. But one thief saw something different in Jesus. The thief on Jesus' right said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus responded, "Today you will be with me in paradise." This thief, who had lived a life of sin, was promised salvation in his final moments. Jesus didn't wait for the man to change first. He offered him grace and forgiveness right then and there. This shows that no one is beyond redemption. No matter how far we've fallen, God's grace is always available. Even when we feel lost or unworthy, it's never too late to turn to Jesus. The third word, "Woman, here is your son," and then, "Here is your mother." Even in the middle of his pain, Jesus showed care for his mother. He saw Mary and the disciple John standing nearby and made sure Mary would be taken care of after his death. Jesus knew his time was running out, and yet he still thought about the well-being of others. He ensured that Mary, who had already lost her husband, would have someone to support her. The fourth word, my God, why have you forsaken me?" For 3 hours, darkness covered the land. At about 3 p.m., when the darkness lifted, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This was not a cry of doubt, but a quote from Psalm 22, showing that even in his greatest moment of despair, Jesus clung to the scriptures. In that moment, Jesus felt abandoned, but he knew that God had a greater purpose. In our own struggles, we may feel abandoned by God. We may ask, why me? But even when we don't understand what's happening in our lives, Jesus teaches us to keep trusting. His cry reminds us that even in our darkest moments, God is with us and he has a plan for our lives. Though it feels like we've been abandoned, God never truly leaves us. The fifth word, I am thirsty. Crucifixion was the worst form of punishment. After being tortured, the convict was nailed to the cross, exposed to the burning heat and in constant agony. Jesus had been through hours of unimaginable suffering. His body was weak, and he was thirsty. This cry was not just a physical need, but a reminder of his humanity. Jesus, the Son of God, experienced all the pain and suffering that we do. He understands our struggles because he walked through them himself. The sixth word, it is finished. Jesus had completed the work he came to do. He had lived a perfect life, taught the truth, healed the sick, and shown us how to love. Now, on the cross, he declared that his mission was accomplished. The debt of sin was paid in full. Nothing more was needed to secure salvation for humanity. The seventh word, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. With these words, Jesus showed his trust in God even as he faced death. He knew that death was not the end. He was surrendering his spirit to the Father, trusting that God would raise him from the dead. Jesus' final words show us how to trust God even when we face our own darkest times. He knew that the Father's plan was greater than anything he could see in the moment. Each of these 7 words carries deep meaning. They teach us forgiveness, grace, trust, and the hope of eternal life. Jesus' last words from the cross are not just words spoken long ago. They are lessons for us today. Through his sacrifice, we can find hope, healing, and a path to eternal life. Vinegar was brought to Jesus' lips, a seemingly small but cruel act that held deep meaning. At that moment, everything became clear. Jesus was not just dying. He was fulfilling yet another prophecy from Psalm 69, which says, "They gave me gall for my food and vinegar for my thirst." This fulfillment of prophecy shows us that God has a plan, even in the darkest and most painful moments of life. Every detail of Jesus' crucifixion had been foretold, and every one of them came to pass with perfect precision. This should give us confidence in knowing that God is in control, even when everything around us seems uncertain. Can you trust that God is working in your life even when you can't see how things will turn out? Throughout Jesus' arrest, trial, and crucifixion, not one word of complaint escaped his lips. There was no protest, no begging for mercy, no cry of anger at his tormentors. Jesus endured all his suffering with majestic calm, as the prophet Isaiah had foretold. As a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Jesus' silence in the face of extreme suffering is not just a historical detail. It's a powerful example for us today. He endured all of this without opening his mouth in protest. He accepted God's will for his life, trusting that through his suffering, God's plan for salvation would be fulfilled. When we face our own struggles, do we complain, or do we trust that God has a plan, even when things seem hopeless? Now let's think about the meaning of water in the Gospel of John. The theme of thirst and water is present throughout the Gospel, appearing in several key moments in Jesus' ministry. Jesus' first miracle involved water when he turned water into wine at a wedding in Cana. He revealed himself as the Messiah to a Samaritan woman at a well, asking her for a drink and then offering her living water. He told her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." In John 5, Jesus healed a paralytic at the pool of Bethesda. In John 9, he healed a blind man by sending him to wash in the pool of Siloam. In John 6, he walked on the waters of the Sea of Galilee. And during the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, when the priests poured water over the altar, as part of a ceremony that symbolized the coming of the Messiah, Jesus stood up and said, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink." At the Last Supper after dinner, Jesus poured water into a basin and washed his disciples' feet, symbolizing his humility and love. And on the cross he cried out, "I am thirsty," a final expression of his human need. After he died, a soldier pierced his side and blood and water flowed out. The water that Jesus offers is not just water from any well. It is a gift of eternal life, a gift that only the Messiah can give. The water Jesus offers is a living water that doesn't just quench physical thirst, it satisfies the soul. He offers an eternal fountain of satisfaction, a spiritual refreshment that will never run dry. Jesus gives the water of life, which continues to meet our needs, both spiritual and emotional, day after day, never running out. Now let's consider the sixth word Jesus spoke on the cross. It is finished. This wasn't just a whisper of surrender. It was a loud cry of victory. It is finished was not a lament. It was a declaration of triumph. For the believer, it is finished is not just a statement from Jesus. It's a promise, a deep assurance. Imagine a man trapped in a dark prison, chained and struggling to break free, but to no avail. He's exhausted and it seems like there is no way out. But then, suddenly, he hears the words, "It is finished," and immediately the chains fall off and the door to his prison swings open. He is free. So it is for us. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross broke the chains of sin, opened the gates of heaven, and set us free. When we ask ourselves, "How can I repay you, Jesus?" the answer is, you can't. Jesus would reply, "I've already paid it all." Salvation is not something we can earn through good works or by trying to pay God back. It's a gift that was freely given, not earned. Our response should be one of gratitude, living out our faith by following Jesus' example, loving others the way he has loved us. Salvation is a finished work. It's not a path that we carve out on our own from earth to heaven, but a path that God made for us from heaven to earth. The work of salvation was a task that the Father assigned to the Son, and Jesus completed it perfectly. When he said, "It is finished," there was nothing more that needed to be done. He did it all. Jesus' death was the final payment for sin. Because of his perfect sacrifice, we are free. Jesus' atonement on the cross means that we will never experience the full weight of sin or the eternal consequences of sin. Because of his victory over death, we are forgiven and redeemed. Salvation is not something we can earn through deeds or merit. It is a gift of God's grace. It is not about what we do for God, but about what God has done for us through Jesus. Faith is like the hand of a beggar receiving a gift from a king. Jesus paid for our salvation with his own blood, and there is nothing more we can add to it. Once he declared, "It is finished," there's nothing else we can do to earn it. It is already done. Now, let's move on to the seventh and final word Jesus spoke on the cross. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Here Jesus hangs, seemingly powerless. One of the soldiers sarcastically says, "Where is his God now?" But Jesus, with his eyes fixed on heaven, was not defeated. With a clear and strong voice, he cried out, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." In these words, Jesus was completing his mission. He was crushing the head of the serpent, triumphing over Satan and all of his legions, and making it possible for us to be redeemed to God. Jesus didn't die because he was murdered. He gave his life willingly. His final prayer came from Psalm 31, "Into your hands I commit my spirit. Deliver me, Lord, my faithful God." This prayer was a common bedtime prayer that Jewish mothers taught their children, but by adding the word Father, Jesus shows a deep, intimate trust in God. As children would sleep in their parents' arms, Jesus was now, at this moment, trusting himself into his Father's arms. The struggle was over. The battle had been won. Jesus' final words remind us that real strength doesn't come from avoiding suffering, but from confronting it with faith in God. Jesus showed us that true strength is not in being free from pain, but in trusting God's will in the midst of pain. His surrender to God's plan was not a sign of weakness, but a final act of victory. Jesus didn't let death master him. He mastered death through his faith in the Father. In this final moment, another prophecy was fulfilled. According to the Jewish calendar, days begin at sundown. It was already about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they needed to take the bodies down before the Sabbath began. The Romans usually left the bodies on the cross to be devoured by vultures, but if they needed to speed up the death, they would break the victims' legs. This would cause them to suffocate quickly because they could no longer support their weight. But when the soldiers came to break Jesus' legs, they found that he had already died. His death came quickly, much quicker than the usual agonizing process of crucifixion. Pilate was surprised when Joseph of Arimathea asked for Jesus' body, because he had died so quickly. His legs were not broken, which fulfilled another prophecy. He protects all his bones, not one of them will be broken. Now let's summarize the meaning of Jesus' last words on the cross. First, a word of forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Jesus didn't just pray for his executioners, but also took away their guilt. Second, a word of salvation. Today you will be with me in paradise. Jesus offered eternal life to a man who had lived his whole life in sin. This shows that salvation isn't based on merit, but is given by grace. Third, a word of care. Woman, here is your son. Here is your mother. Jesus entrusted the care of his mother to John, showing his love and concern for her. Fourth, a word of distress. I am thirsty. Jesus fully shared in our human suffering. Fifth, a word of abandonment. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus experienced the Father's turning away in that moment so that we could be reconciled to God. Sixth, a word of victory. It is finished. The cross is not a symbol of weakness, but of strength. It is not defeat, but victory. Not failure, but triumph. These final words of Jesus are a powerful testimony of his love for us and his complete submission to the Father's will. They are words of forgiveness, hope, and salvation that still speak to us today. Victory. Seventh, a word of surrender. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Jesus finished the work of saving us and then gave himself to the Father. His mission was done. Our salvation was secured. Each of these words answers a part of the big question behind the cross. Why did Jesus have to die? The answer covers many ideas. To satisfy God's justice, to save us from eternal death, to defeat Satan, to offer forgiveness for sins, and to make us right with God. But in the end, it all comes down to one word: love. Jesus died because of love. The Father gave up the Son because of love. Love for you and for me. God is love by nature, and because he is eternal, his love is eternal. This means that his love didn't start with us. We didn't love God first. It was God who loved us and drew us to him. I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with unfailing kindness. God loved us when we were just an idea in his mind. God loved us before he created the world. God loved us even before he made us. For Christians, the cross is not just a religious symbol, but a constant reminder of God's redeeming love and Jesus' ultimate sacrifice. It challenges us to live by the teachings of the gospel, to love our neighbors as ourselves, and to seek justice and peace in a world filled with injustice and violence. In the end, the legacy of the cross invites us to change. It calls us to live in a way that honors Jesus' sacrifice by sharing the love and grace we have received with everyone around us. May we, therefore, embrace the legacy of the cross with humility and thankfulness, knowing that through it we find the path to true life in relationship with God and each other. We hope that after watching this video, you feel encouraged to say with the Apostle Paul, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And so ended the greatest speech in history. Jesus spent his last hours on the cross from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. In the morning he was nailed to the cross. In the afternoon he wore a crown. In the morning he was an enemy of Caesar. By the afternoon he was a friend of God. In the morning he was hated by men. By the afternoon, he was with the angels. In the morning, he died as a criminal on earth. By the evening, he lived as a citizen of heaven. Jesus asked for forgiveness for those who crucified him. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. How can we apply this level of forgiveness in our lives? Who do we need to forgive today to free our hearts from the burden of resentment? To the repentant thief, Jesus promised, today you will be with me in paradise. Do we have certainty about our salvation? Do we trust in Jesus' promise of eternal life with him? From the cross, Jesus showed his care by saying, Woman, here is your son. Son, Here is your mother. Are we attentive to the needs of our family and loved ones? How can we show them our love in a real, meaningful way? Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Do we ever feel abandoned by God? Let us remember that Jesus also went through darkness so that we would never be alone in our trials. Jesus said, "I am thirsty." This simple phrase shows his complete humanity. Do we recognize our own human needs and limits? Do we seek the living water in Jesus to satisfy our spiritual thirst? With the words, "It is finished," Jesus completed his redemptive mission. But there's something else you should know. Many of these events were prophesied long before they happened. One powerful prophecy said that Jesus would drink vinegar before he died on the cross. And so it happened. Coincidence? Nothing is a coincidence. Click on this video to learn why Jesus drank vinegar on the cross. You need to understand the hidden spiritual meaning of vinegar. See you there. Blessings.